Welcome back to the core. We're covering biblical family life. In our last session, we're talking specifically about being disciplinarians. And although I'm in the role of the father and what the father does, I would like to tell you that this also is a part of the mother. And although we are a team, and usually the father, I think it is best as the image of Father God, that the father be the one that renders the sentence and not the mother. But if the father is away and the mother needs to bring this discipline, it's a good idea the mother also do it when it is time sensitive. In other words, they may forget all about it by the time the father gets home and it's a different thing, or maybe the smaller sentences, but the bigger issues. And a good rule is that if the children are together in the home with you as a mother, they do this breach, then you arrest them and put them in jail with no pleasures, no joy, no anything, locked away until the father is available. Then he comes home and deals with it. That process helps too. Because really the role of the mother is more of a nurturer and a consoler. It's okay that she be strict and punished, but it's very hard. It's grievous to the woman to do it. A man will more naturally be able to render this kind of punishment, as discipline is more masculine than it is feminine. But we're going to go back to our book now where we just did in our last one. I want to talk now about the fact that the mother can be a father. The mother that is a father. So there are instances in which women are left as the sole parents of children. And the reasons of why are really not important in the light of what we're covering here, because we know that there's a lot of reasons. The fact is these women are forced into a difficult and trying position. Some women may end up being single mothers because they became illegitimately pregnant by someone and that man ran away and disappeared. Oh, that's a hard case, isn't it? The worst cases would be a woman who became pregnant from molestation, incest, or rape. And either way, if the child is born, that is a child, a beautiful and a wonderful child. In fact, some of the greatest people on earth today doing the most influential and wonderful things were in fact born as illegitimate children, or children who had no father because the father ran away, or maybe because the father died. That's another case. Or even sometimes the child of a woman who was raped. And in this particular case, though, often maybe it's because of divorce. And we've already covered divorce and the destructive force of it and why God hates it. But if so, you are then a divorced parent and you still have your child and the custody is either shared or given to you while the child is in your custody, you need to do all the things that the father would usually do. But if the child is given to you entirely and the husband wants nothing to do with the child when there's a divorce, then there again, you are the full-time parent. So that makes you both mother/father at the same time. And there are a lot of reasons why, but if it is the case, I do like to entertain it because it's pretty prevalent in a lot of places in the world today, especially prevalent in third world countries that we work in. Some of our church works in those realms, slum works especially. So the mother who must become the father in a home will need the Lord's help if she wants to successfully raise her children. The entire section that we're covering right now is on the role of the father that, thus far in the home. It can be adopted. That all that we've covered can be adopted as a guideline for the woman who is the mother who has to be a father. So it's a good idea for the woman who is a father in the home to find trustworthy men to serve as male mentors. And although the Lord can use a woman as a father figure, in many cases there's still a prevailing need inherently for a love relationship to form between the male child and another male. And so this longing is instinctually put there by God, and it's in the heart of man as an inherent desire to know the Father God in heaven, just as we've covered in these lessons about the Father being a figure or a type or an image of God. So a man only can really fulfill that instinct that's there. And this is done by finding big brothers. This is the good thing if you're part of a church and you and your children, you as the mother who are alone with your child or children, go to that church, you can build relationships with families in the church. And then those fathers can include your children, not all the time, but on certain events, at moments, so they can see. And that's what I was as a young child. My father was gone, as I said, so I only had my mother. But the more time I spent with my friend Mike and his family and looked at his father, the more time I spent with other people, the more I learned what it was like to be a father. And I saw and saw those lessons before my eyes, and I adopted those principles, and I grew. So you have to consider that. However, be careful, because there are pitfalls in regard to this also, because homosexuality will often develop in a child that is fatherless. And it starts as a desire to know the love of the father, and is soon perverted into a seeking of acceptance by another man in a physical sense. And that's good that they want to have that physical sense, but if a perversion comes in, that's where you also, as the single mother, need to be ready for this. This can become sexual as the child encounters men that abuse that longing. If that man out there, that predator, this pedophile, or this man that wants to abuse your children, can be out there. They are predators. They do come looking, and my wife often has spoken about this subject to people, and in fact she refers to it as like a vampire. Once these men were bitten and maybe they were abused, if those aren't dealt with, those issues are not dealt with, they grow up looking to bite someone else. In other words, that spirit that is in them, that spirit of perversion, will extend to be applied to someone else, a child. They look to do that. And it's funny, because my whole life I was a target of those men. My whole life. And I can share stories of where they were after me all the time. And my mother, of course, being a single mother, she did what she did. She would bring me even to, her office where she worked, and she had doctors that she worked for, 4 surgeons, in fact, that she worked for. But some of those surgeons were homosexuals, or at least one of them that I knew for sure. And that particular surgeon, the few times that I would be in the office visiting as a teenager area, 12, 13 years old, I would be visiting my mother at her office. He would come in, and he would always be fond of me and come near me. And every time he came near me, he would always have to, at one time or another, touch me. And I remember it always made me feel very uncomfortable. If I was sitting in a chair, he would sit next to me, and he would say, "Hey, how are you? How are things at school?" And he would be polite. And to my mother, everything looked pretty innocuous, like, this is okay. Then he would do this moment. There would be this moment where he'd reach over and put his hand on my knee or my leg, my thigh, and squeeze it, but too weird. And it would make me very uncomfortable, because this guy would be doing it. And I knew, no, it would creep me out. I never really had that feeling in me to find that as nice at all. Well, I went a few circumstances like that. Later on, when I was 17 and went into cosmetology school to learn how to be a hairdresser, well, it was open season. And all of the men there saw me and came after me and went after that. Why? It was like there was something in me that put up a signal that they should attempt to do so. Maybe because I was a little more feminine than most, because I was raised by a woman. And the predominant figures in my life were women also, because my mother's brothers were the ones closest to me. My Aunt Carol, my Aunt Claudia, they raised me, and they were masculine women. They were strong women. In other words, they were single, and they had to live on their own. And they did not have children. They didn't, not in those years. And so they were rough and ready type strong personalities, and they were great examples in my life. So my views of women were different. But I never once have ever entertained the concept of being homosexual. It was never something in me, although I was rightly put in a position without a father to be there. And sure enough, the men who carried those spirits were always coming after me, always looking for me. Even relatives in my family overall, not in my immediate home, but in other realms, I was considered a target. And in beauty school also, a target. And they would all flirt with me. I mean, they would be overt, because at 17 years old, they would talk to me and Stephen, hey, they would be like really flamboyant and right in my face. And I was friendly to them. At that time, I was already a believer in Christ. I was friendly to them, but I would inevitably tell them about Jesus. And they'd be like, that's just so cliche. Like they would not want to hear it. I have no hatred toward anyone. I love everyone, but I'm speaking to you as a mother who may be a single mother. Be very careful with your children. And if they're little girls, also be very careful with your little girl. Because men who are child molesters would seek to use that opportunity, and that inherent desire in them to have a love relationship and a connection with a male as a father figure can be abused. That's why you need to find a father who has their own children, a pastor who has their own children. I, as the father of a church, I'm happy to offer that example of another alternate source of a man that is a father. And I'm here for your children if they go through those issues or there's problems. I'm happy to do things with them and do activities together and show them what it's like for a father to be in their lives. But that's where you need to look for help. In the church, it's a good place. So these children often have feminine characteristics if they're boys, and therefore become targets of that perversion of man, as I said. So in conclusion of this thing on the father must fulfill his role in the family. And the challenge for men in this world is to rise to the opportunity to forge their children into the image of God by their examples of love and acceptance. And if we can only offer our own children to the Lord, in the end, we will have sufficient reward for eternity. And I thank God that I have that. My children, all of them have come to Christ by my influence, and I was there for them, and I was happy to be there for them. Wonderful experiences I've had raising my children and enjoying my time with them. So that concludes that part of here in biblical family life with the father. Now we're going to move on to what is next, which is the mother. And so we turn to our manual where we see the section on the mother's role. The role of the mother in the family is so important that it could be thought of as the infrastructure of the family, where the father is the direction and strength, the mother is the bond of love and nurturer of all. Her very image of the giver of life through her breasts is symbolized in many cultures and even worshipped. You understand that even in our own Christian culture, we refer to God as El Shaddai. You know that name El Shaddai. Well, it is an adaptation of the name of an idol that was existing years ago that was a multi-breasted image. Meaning it was like a woman with many breasts. As perverted as that sounded, it meant that there was no limit to the nurturing milk of provision that flowed. And it was all about that. Where God is, that's why we called him El Shaddai, because he is never going to run out of provision. His provision will always be there for us. There will always be. He is more than enough. Excess, more milk than a baby could drink if a woman had that many breasts. And I know that a lot of people have trouble wrapping their minds around the ideas that an idol would be used to symbolically show us the image of God's greatness. But in that case, it was not an image of God. It was an image of an ideal. And the Jews used it. So we know that the mother is that image of provision in life. There are lots of ideas concerning the role of a mother or woman in general in the family that are birthed from and maintained by cultural interpretation. In vain do we look in the scriptures for traces of the low position which women occupies in many Eastern lands. In other words, they put the women in this subservient place that are controlled, like within Muslim realms often and other realms. They will put this woman down into this very subservient, low position. And there are certain concepts about the woman that we see that. We know that she's subordinate in relation to the husband in the home, but that's not talking about women in general. That's in relation to the husband. Remember that scripture says that you are to be, women be subject to your own husbands. It does not say women be subject to men in general. And my wife makes it very clear. One time she was in church and some man told her something and she was like, I don't have to listen to you. You're like, whatever. The Bible says you have to be subject to men. And she said, subject to my man, not to you. I'm obedient to my husband and I'm submitted to him, but I'm not submitting to you at all. She got in his face and he was like, this woman's a rebellious woman. Later, it ended up having the pastor hear out the discourse that took place in the church. And the pastor was like, well, it's not your wife. What business do you have? He corrected it. So that means that there are some errors out there concerning what women are. And this is in Eastern lands, you see, but the scriptures do not project that. Today, there are many common abusive patterns toward women, but we find that this was never the case in Hebrew culture. God's people held women in high esteem and cherished mothers. And we can prove that scripturally, and that's exactly what we're going to do in this part of our teaching. The mother's position in the Old Testament. Let's look at this. We have a lot of scripture to catch up on here too. There's lots of passages I'm going to show you. A false impression has been created by her present position in the East, especially under Mohammedan rule, which is the Islamic rule. And her place as depicted in the scriptures is totally a different one than what some of those cultures will show us. So women in the Bible move on the same social plane with men. Now remember, this is biblical family life, right? So if we're going to talk about what a woman is in the mother's role, we're going to talk about womanhood as the Bible describes it very clearly. So as we look at this, we see Exodus chapter 15 and verse 20. I read to you where it says, then Miriam, we see Miriam here, right? We know this is Moses' sister. Then Miriam the prophet, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women followed her with timbrels and dancing. Miriam sang to them, sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. Another passage of scripture we see in the same section in Judges chapter 4, verses 4 and 5. I want to read where it says, now Deborah, a prophet. So we saw Miriam, a prophet, Old Testament, right there with Moses and with Aaron. Now we see Deborah, a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time. So here we see Deborah in the Old Testament as a woman leading Israel. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went up to her to have their disputes decided. So Deborah is a really powerful picture. In fact, later I have a special teaching I'm going to give you after we're finished with the mother's role, if we get to it today or soon, or if it's a couple of sessions away. We know that it's going to focus on Deborah a bit. I'm going to talk about women in the place of ministry and what the Bible says also. But here we're looking at the woman in general, and we see another passage here in 2 Kings 22 and verse 14 where it says that Hilkiah, the priest, Ahikam, Akbor, Shaphan, and Asaiah went to speak to the prophet Huldah, who was the wife of Shallum, son of Tikvah, the son of Harhas, keeper of the wardrobe. She lived in Jerusalem in the new quarter. She said to them, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. So here we see these women, three of them, just as we're beginning here, all in positions of authority. Miriam, and we see Hilkiah, we see Huldah here, we see Deborah here, all these individuals that are functioning in these realms as women. So we continue. The love of offspring was deeply embedded in the heart of Hebrew women. Thus, motherhood was highly respected. So among the patriarch women, and especially mothers, they occupy a prominent place. And some passages we're going to look at here concerning this. We go to Genesis chapter 24. We're going to read verses 28, then on down. We're going to read 50 through 53 as well, or 55. We're going to read a couple of passages. Let's start here by looking at this one. The young woman ran and told her mother's household about these things. Now Rebekah had a brother named Laban, and he hurried out to the man at the spring. As soon as he had seen the nose ring and the bracelets on his sister's arms, and had heard Rebekah tell what the man said to her, he went out to the man and found him standing by the camels near the spring. Come, and of course this is Isaac's courtship. Come, you who are blessed by the Lord, he said. Why are you standing out here? I have prepared the house and a place for the camels. Laban and Bethuel answered, this is from the Lord. We can say nothing to you, and we're skipping down to verse 50. We say nothing to you one way or the other. So in this passage we see as it's going on that the women, this is the two of them. Let me go back and show you that. Laban and Bethuel. So this is Laban and Bethuel. This is a man and a woman. Here is Rebekah. Take her and go, and let her become the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has directed. When Abraham's servant heard what they said, he bowed down to the ground before the Lord. Then the servant brought out gold and silver jewelry and articles of clothing and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave costly gifts to her brother and to her mother. Then he and the men who were with him ate and drank and spent the night there. When they got up the next morning, he said, send me on my way to my master. But her brother and her mother replied, let the young woman remain with us 10 days or so, then you may go. So here we see that in this particular story, Rebekah's marriage with Isaac, her mother seems to have equal voice with her father and Laban, her brother. So here we see this relationship where the woman's importance is very clear. In fact, we see that Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, who went to find the wife Rebekah for his master's son Isaac, gives gifts not just to the men but to the mother because of this respect. So Jacob, it says, obeyed his father and mother. In Genesis 28 and verse 7, I want to read 6 and 7 actually there, where it says, now Esau learned that Isaac had blessed Jacob and had sent him to Padan Aram to take a wife from there, and that when he blessed him, he commanded him, do not marry a Canaanite woman, and that Jacob had obeyed his father and mother and had gone to Padan Aram. So there we see he's obeyed his father and his mother. Jacob did, one of our patriarchs. Israel himself didn't listen to just the father, but also to the mother. And in actuality, his mother evidently was his chief counselor, right? Look at Jacob's relationship with his mother. She's the one that recommended that he go out and that he pretend to be Esau so that he could get the birthright. And so he was under the counsel of his mother. Now, some people might say, well, that counsel was kind of a crooked counsel. Actually, that counsel was exactly what God intended. And it was the purposes of God because of the fact, as the Bible said, that Esau had despised his birthright. So the counsel of the mother was helpful in a system where whatever the men would say would more likely be held accountable. God worked it out that the woman would be a voice of influence to be sure that the man made the choice that God wanted, even if he didn't quite understand the whole thing. And this reminds me, some people would say, well, that's actually manipulative on the part of the woman. And I always think of that quote from the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, when she was describing the marriage, and she said, understand, she said, that the man is the head of the home. The man is the head, but the woman is the neck, and she turns the head wherever she wants to. And that's partially true. We ultimately have to make decisions as men, but our wives are very influential, and sometimes I've made a choice and my wife comes and says something and I turn in a different way and make a different choice. And therefore I should be in constant counsel with my wife, just as we see here in the Bible and all these stories of the processing of the lineage of Christ, everything that came through. That's what the Bible is. It's basically a storybook of the lineage of Christ, building up to Jesus and then going into eternity. We see women there. We see women in very important positions. Look at Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. What does it say there? Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Well, the question here is, who is being honored? Well, both your father and your mother. So the law places the child under obligation of honoring the father and the mother. The child that strikes father or mother or curses either of them is punished by death, it says in Exodus chapter 21, verse 15. Anyone who attacks their father or mother is to be put to death. And a verse later in 17, anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. So it's not just the father and respect for the father, but it's also respect for the mother, because the mother is as important in that regard. Maybe she is subservient in the overall decision-making process, but it is not to say that she is not important and not crucial. Otherwise, why would God have even made Eve to begin with? To be there because he was alone. If we make our decisions alone, it's not good. That's why God gave us women. So that's the way that I see it. We see another passage now here as we go to Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 18 through 21. If someone has a stubborn and rebellious son who does not obey his father and mother and will not listen to them, both of them, when they discipline him, his father and mother shall take him or take hold of him and bring him to the elders at the gate of his town. They shall say to the elders, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of the town are to stone him to death. You must purge the evil from among you. All Israel will hear of it and be afraid. Now this is another form of punishment, going to such extremes. It seems wild, but notice the mother and the father are involved in even the most extreme forms of discipline of the child, together as a team. So we see a team, a helpmeet in a team with influence and very important decisions that have to be made in life. In Leviticus 19:3, it says, in one place in the law, the mother is even placed before the father as the object of reverence. And that's the scripture where it says, each of you must respect your mother and father. So here it mentions the mother first. You must observe my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. But he says first here, your mother and your father, which is very interesting. And, we know also in Psalm 35 and verse 14, I want us to read that, where it says that I went about mourning as though for my friend or brother. I bowed my head in grief as though weeping for my mother. The psalmist depicts deepest grief as that of one who mourns for his mother. And the entire book of Psalms, in fact, and Proverbs, the duty of reverence, love, and obedience of sons to their mothers is constantly mentioned. Isaiah 66 and verse 13 says, as a mother comforts her child, so will I comfort you, and you will be comforted over Jerusalem. So here we see that passage. The greatest comfort imaginable is that wherewith a mother comforts her son. So now we go to the second part here, number 2, the mother's position in the New Testament. So now we've seen the mother in the Old Testament, all these beautiful stories of Miriam, and we see the prophetesses, we see Huldah, we see Deborah as a ruler over Israel. She was one of the judges. We see again and again. Now, that's the Old Testament. Now let's move to the New Testament and see what the Bible speaks about women there. The mother's position into what is true in the Old Testament is equally true of the New Testament. The same high type of womanhood, the same reverence for one's mother is in evidence in both books. Look at the birth of Christ, how it lifted motherhood to the highest possible plane and idealized it for all time. Luke 1:28 says, the angel went to her and said, greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you. In Luke 1:41, it says Elizabeth honored because of Mary. Actually, we can go to that passage. No, we're not going to have that passage we just mentioned here. Elizabeth honored Mary because of the fact that she was the mother of the unborn Savior. You know that moment where she goes into the house and Elizabeth immediately says that, what a wonderful blessing it is that I would be able to entertain here in my house the mother of the Lord, the mother of the Messiah. And that, once again, was respect for the female. So now we go to John 19:27, where it says, near the cross. Well, let's back up to 25. We'll read the whole account. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother, his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved, of course that's John, standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. So this is the day that Mary began to actually live with John, the disciple of Jesus. So the last thing Jesus did on the cross was to bestow his mother on John, the beloved, as his special inheritance. So what woman is today, what she is in particular in her motherhood, she owes wholly to the position in which the scriptures have placed her. And as we get into that, we're going to discuss what is the virtuous woman being a virtuous mother. And this is a fact. The 31st proverb is perhaps the most extensive passage dealing with what God considered to be a good woman in every area of the family. So the remainder of this teaching on the role of the mother will be based on this passage. And I want us to begin with this fact that a mother is a teacher. So we go to the Proverbs 31, 1 through 7, beginning there, where it says, "The sayings of King Lemuel, an inspired utterance, his mother taught him. Listen, my son. Listen, son of my womb. Listen, my son, the answer to my prayers. Do not spend your strength on women, your vigor on those who ruin kings. It's not for kings, Lemuel. It's not for kings to drink wine, not for rulers to crave beer, lest they drink and forget what has been decreed, and deprive all the oppressed of their rights. Let beer be for those who are perishing, wine for those who are in anguish. Let them drink and forget their poverty, and remember their misery no more." So here we see the voice of a woman, and this is the character of a good mother, and the fact that she's instructing the son. And this portion of scripture they're the words of the King Lemuel when he wrote and said that this is the prophecy of that which his mother taught him. This is just another name, by the way, for Solomon. King Lemuel saw that, so he's talking here about his mother. Two key warnings are given in this teaching, where it says that there are two main destructive forces against a man when he seeks to live a holy life. Number one, concerning women. And then we're going to break down verses in this passage one by one. Proverbs 31:3, where he said there, "Do not spend your strength on women, your vigor on those who ruin kings." Well, this is talking about the fact that the Bible is full of warnings about the seductive nature of women. I mean, we all know the story of Samson and Delilah. We see women throughout the Bible that were deceptive and drew men away. We see all the wives of King Solomon that caused him to breach the laws of Almighty God and inevitably not even do the purposes of God and be drawn away. Of course, he had a lot of them. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines, 1,000 women in his life. So we see that they have this place. Throughout history, women have been seen as a powerful force of manipulation in the lives of political leaders. We think of Helen of Troy. We hear of these stories of entire battles with many thousands dying, all because of one woman. We see in the Bible also the evil concept of Jezebel, Ahab's wife, and she married this Israelite king. He was an Israelite, but he didn't follow God. He followed the Baals, which she taught. And she brought in Baal worship and she established all the priests of Baal, and in fact murdered all the priests of God. Those who are servants of Jehovah she had put away. And she was an evil manipulator. And Jezebel also took control over situations for Ahab. And whenever Ahab was not decisive or didn't do things or didn't get his way in certain realms, she said, because there was one particular case where he wanted a certain vineyard, and he was sulking over this, and Jezebel came into King Ahab and said, "Why are you sulking? What's wrong, my king?" And he said, "Well, I want this vineyard, but he won't sell it to me." This particular man, I don't recall the name right now. She said, I'll take care of this for you. And she went out and arranged for him to be lied about in the city council by hiring people to go and lie and bring a false accusation that was punishable by death. And she did it. Ahab didn't realize it was going on, but they killed this man. So she came home and told Ahab, cheer up, go ahead, take your vineyard. It's available for you. Go ahead and get it. Why? Well, because the owner of it is dead. So she was a wicked woman doing horrible things. And this is a lot of people have this teaching these days about a Jezebel spirit, and they point at a lot of women and say that, they are like Jezebel. And this is a cruel and a harsh thing to claim that some women are like Jezebel, and they have this idea. Women in general, yes, sometimes can be a bit manipulative, but it is also in their nature to want to cause things to move toward the right direction for what they believe is good. There's evil in everyone. And believe me, I've met a lot more Judas Iscariots than I have Jezebels. I've met a lot more Sauls out there than I have Jezebels. I've met a lot more Hamans than I have Jezebels. I've met a lot more satraps in the day of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, than I have Daniels. I've met a lot more evil in man than I ever have in women. So why do we just penalize all women for Jezebel? It's not true. John the Baptist, wow, he lost his head due to the influence of a seductive nature of women. The evil counsel of a mother caused this. In fact, that was two women working together. The mother wanted John the Baptist to have his head cut off, and he was a socialite and popular in the court. And so when the king was pleased and said, up to half my kingdom I will give to you, the girl didn't know what to ask for, asked her mother, and her mother said to her, ask for John the Baptist's head on a platter. So she went in and asked for it. And the king, because he had said this in front of all his guests, although he was afraid, he did it. All because of women's influence for evil. But I say this, as much as women can use their influence for evil, women can use their influence for good. So mothers just need to be careful and should be sure to educate and warn their sons and daughters about the evils of promiscuity. Because all of these things had to do with sexuality and their connection to that. So my mother showed me horrible pictures when I was a boy of VD victims. These are people that had venereal diseases. And I was just 13, right when I come into puberty. The first thing she showed me is, let me show you some books. If you go out there and you have sex with these young women out there, and they're out there everywhere and they're going to want you. And at that time I was thinking, as a stupid child, I sure hope so. But I had no idea. And she showed me these pictures of diseases, and oh my gosh, it horrified me. She terrified me. The time I went outside, the first girl I saw, I looked away in fear. I was petrified to have anything to do with any female. So my mother was just doing her job to prepare me when they would try to use their wiles to bring me into an illicit relationship or in the wrong direction. I was afraid of being involved with women. Now, here the mother of Lemuel goes on and speaks about also other issues concerning alcoholism, for instance. There's a scripture where we just read that it's not for kings, Lemuel, it's not for kings to drink wine, not for rulers to crave beer, lest they drink and forget what has been decreed and deprive all the oppressed of their rights. Let beer be for those who are perishing, wine for those who are in anguish. Let them drink and forget their poverty and remember their misery no more. Now, be careful to understand this passage is not outlawing alcohol and the consumption of alcohol entirely. It's just saying, once again, it's a reference to abuse. If a ruler or a leader is doing his job and he needs to pay attention to his leadership, then the last thing he needs to be doing is getting drunk all the time and forgetting the morals and the values that he lives by. And that I'm, of course, in complete agreement with, and this woman is right. So the next most destructive force is seen in substance abuse. Man has sought an escape from the pressure of life through the use of mind-altering substances since the start. One of the first things that Noah did after starting the new world was plant a vineyard and make wine to get drunk, and it caused sin. And his sin was his nakedness. And that's a whole other story I'll go into another time. But it's important to understand that it is the abuse of this. And a mother stands as the first line of defense against these forces by warning her children. In the United States of America, the most powerful anti-drinking lobbyist group is mad. It's called Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and they have caused more laws to be passed to cause the age at which someone can drink. It used to be that you could consume alcohol at the age of 18. They pushed forward with laws as lobbyists to get it up to 21, and they'll push it up to 25 if they can, because these are women who care and have lost even their own children because of alcoholism and drink driving or drunk driving. Now we go on. Proverbs 31 and verse 8, it says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy." So this is continuing. The mother is mentioning here this actual thing about what the mother is saying here about the poor is mentioned twice in this proverb. We're going to cover it in both realms concerning the woman or the mother. This indicates importance in the Hebrew language, the repetition of a phrase. The poor is extremely important to God. If we meet the needs of the poor and help them grow, God will always protect us. So here are a few of the many passages that describe God's blessing for those who help the poor. So the law of God in the Old Testament is filled with instructions on how to care for the poor among us, but the book of Proverbs captures the Spirit's feeling. So let's just revisit a couple of these. It says, "It is a sin to despise one's neighbor, but blessed is the one who is kind to the needy." Proverbs 14:21. So there is a divine joy that comes from helping those that are less than you. When you help them, God deposits that joy in your heart. So you must feel good, or you just feel good after you've done something for the poor. It's true. I do it all the time. I'm always looking for ways to provide for those people who need, and it's just a great feeling, and God rewards it. Prosperity comes from it. "Whoever oppresses the poor shows contempt for their master or their maker, but whoever is kind to the needy honors God," it says in Proverbs 14:31. So we honor God when we have mercy on the poor. Remember that Jesus takes it seriously when we help others or other fellow human beings that have less than we do. The reward in the end will be as if we had mercy on Jesus himself, and not just on the people that we've helped. And that's a reference to Matthew chapter 25, "When I was poor, you clothed me, you fed me." All these things that would cause poverty also causes other crimes. "When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was sick," within the realms of poverty, we see all of those things. We see this need for clothing, we need for food, problems come about because of a lack of education. In fact, most crime come about because of a lack of education, where people could not afford to be educated, and therefore without that knowledge, not that growth and that structure, they ended up getting into crime. They don't have the wherewithal to earn the money, so they end up stealing it, etc. But here, the poor, we need to take very careful note of what the Bible is saying. "Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they have done." That's Proverbs 19:17. And many are saying that you should not give money to the poor. Some people say that, like, don't give to them. And these people are sometimes greedy people who are looking for an excuse to not have to give their money to anyone. Let's say you see a homeless person, and there's a certain part about this I agree. I don't agree with giving money in sums of cash to just anyone. This passage clearly shows us that God will give us the money back when we give to the poor. So if Jesus came to you in the flesh and asked for you to lend him money, would you? That's the question. Would you do that? Well, whoever shuts their ears to the cry of the poor will also cry out and not be answered, it says in Proverbs 21:13. So as we sow, we will reap. What we give out, we will receive. So if we have mercy and open our ears to hear the cry of the poor, we will be avoiding our own poverty. God is watching every bit of money we give. Another scripture, and we're going to end with these two more here. "The generous will themselves be blessed, for they share their food with the poor." Proverbs 22:9. Not only do we hear their cry, but we open our eyes to see their need and allow that need to touch us, thereby causing us to have compassion and give. Such a biblical principle of giving to the poor. It was hardwired into the law, if you remember. It says, those who give to the poor will lack nothing, but those who close their eyes to them receive many curses. Proverbs 28:27. So this is a recommendation of the mother to the king. Don't forget the poor. Care for the poor. Take care of the poor. When we get into, in the next session, the Proverbs woman, 31, which is the proverbial woman, the standard, you're going to see what she does for the poor as well. And I agree entirely. And as I said, hardwired into the law was the principle of leaving the fallen grains of wheat on the ground. Those who harvested could not pick it up. It had to be left for gleaning. That's how Ruth was able to be connected to her destiny. That they could not shake the olive trees to get the olives out. They picked the olives. But at that end, they could not go over the tree a second time. And of course, they would miss some of the olives because they were hiding behind a leaf or other, so it would leave some. Why? It says for the poor and the strangers to be able to have olives. If you worked hard enough, you had enough olives and enough little pieces of grain that you found on the ground to be able to survive. And it's like a welfare system that God put into the whole thing. And then He taught us so many scriptures to help those people. A lot of reasons why people are poor. Sometimes it's because of poor decisions. No pun intended, but bad decisions were made and it caused them to be relegated to a position of poverty. Sometimes it's because they were born that way. There are so many people. I worked in India for 6 years. I've been in Indonesia, Cambodia, around the world to these villages. And a lot of those people, they're just born that way. And Jesus spoke about the poor too. There's a balance. The poor you have with you always. We're not looking for communism. We're not looking to share the wealth with the entire world. We know that the world doesn't work that way. And it can't work that way, nor would God want it to work that way, because that's not His system. Otherwise, everyone would have the same amount of talents, and there would be no reward or punishment ultimately. But no, God is pretty much a capitalist, and He believes in a meritocratic system of earning. And if someone does certain principles and lives certain ways, there will be recompense for that, and they will be rewarded. You reap what you sow. But in some cases of the poor, that's where they are. When we go and we want to help the poor, and this is getting off kind of a bit of a tangent, but as a missionary, it's always my concern to help the poor to get out of their poverty. So the question is, how do I do that? I teach biblical principles. I teach them how to change. Because if I go in just trying to throw money at the poor, and I've tried it in my early years as a missionary, it absolutely doesn't work. Because then they follow money and they never follow God. So I was never one to give a lot. I give strategically. And almost never money. I give objects strategically. I help them. And often not letting them know who's doing it. All so that I can help and aid and do and fulfill the passages we've seen. So here we see King Lemuel's mother describing to him these important principles of life. There's a blessing that comes upon us when we do this. Women inherently are that. Women are better at caring for the poor. Why? Because of the mothering nature of a woman. They mother people. Myra Fernandez, she's watching this right now. I love you, Myra. She had such an open heart as a mother for the poor. Every time she go to any village, still to this day, and when I'll see her, she'll come back and tell me about that village. She says, Stephen, you have to see the poor. You don't understand. They just have this little bit and they eat and there's nothing. And tears would well up in her eyes. What can we do? What can be done? She's always looking to do something. And of course, she takes of her possessions and she multiplies them and gives them out to help the poor. Why? Because she's a mother. And in her heart of hearts, as a female, as a mother, it's so easy because she sees every child as her own child. She sees everyone that is poor as someone she has an opportunity to take care of because she operates in the spirit of a mother and of a woman. And all this I'm saying to say that a woman has a powerful position in God's kingdom, in the body of Christ, as we've seen in the Old Testament, all those stories, in the New Testament also. And we'll get more into that after. But after, in the rest of this class, we're going to talk about the virtuous woman, and then we're going to go on and talk about women also in the place of ministry. And then this is all part of biblical family life, but we have some extra things that we're adding on here. But for now, we're going to take a break, and after the break, we will continue.